Hello everyone, this is Ben, and today we're looking at a Task 1 IELTS bar chart. And it's about average carbon dioxide emissions per person in 4 countries over a period that spans 40 years. I'd like you to read it on your own first. Think about what scores you think it deserves. Then I'll tell you mine at the end after reading the essay. And we can think about why it might get particular scores. When you think about why, you kind of have to use the band descriptors, which anyone can access. They're available to the public. If you want to find them, just Google IELTS Writing Task 1 band descriptors, and you'll find this document, which you can download. It might be a bit small to read on the screen if you're using your phone, but feel free to use another device or print it or something like that. I try to think about the environment, so print as little as possible, but if you have no other way, just print it and have a copy have a copy beside you when listening to this video. So there are 2 slides. This is the first one, and this is the second and final one. I suggest that you just pause on each slide and have a read first. Anyway, let's have a look together. The given line chart. Okay, so obviously it's just a typo, 2 L's, but it doesn't make a good impression, does it? You know, when you've got these kinds of spelling mistakes. I'm just having a look, and some of them are pretty elementary, aren't they, these spelling mistakes? You might find some other ones, but yeah, a careless mistake, okay, it happens, but you should have time at the end. Try to have a couple of minutes to check. But I'm not even sure these are careless, because I don't understand how release can be spelled incorrectly, but it doesn't happen once, it happens twice. And that makes me think that the writer doesn't understand how to spell it. So reels is a new word. We're coining a new word. If you coin a new word, that means you invent a new word. Reels of carbon dioxide. This writer has coined that. We're going to use that word now. The given line chart illustrates the emission of carbon dioxide per person. You kind of have to think about what that means. It probably doesn't mean just what I'm breathing out, does it? It probably means from my activities in life, like if I'm driving a car, for example. We're going to think about all the activities we do which result in CO2 emissions, because we're thinking of our carbon footprint as individuals. And it's taking averages, probably by looking at using like surveys, for example, about how often people drive and what kind of car they use, and that kind of thing, as well as, you know, which appliances they use at home and how long they use them. And that's the one that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you don't know, you have to kind of use your, you know, like kind of common sense is what I'd say. You have to kind of use some critical thinking to think about what this is asking you. And that's important because it's going to affect the language you use. So for me, for example, I'm going to change a few things. Let's say the average annual quantities of emissions of carbon dioxide per person in the United Kingdom, Sweden, Italy and Portugal from 1967 to 2007. I'm using the word quantity because anything that's a gas like CO2 is an amount. But when we've got a focus on a particular unit, which in this case is a kind of mass, I guess, because it's tons, it's related to mass and weight. When we've got a focus on a particular unit being measured, we tend to talk about the quantity. So quantity is a focus on something being measured, which clearly here it is, using a particular unit of measurement. Not time, not like using hours as a unit of measurement, but certainly things like possibly the weight of something or the number of something potentially can be the quantity. And per person, I mean, that's kind of a short form way to say it, because when you read the information here, you don't expect full grammatically correct sentences, but it's your job as the writer of an essay to write in full sentences explaining it more properly. So per person, let's say, resulting from the average activities, resulting from the activities I'm kind of running out of space a bit there, my apologies. I'll use the eraser so you don't have to hear that tapping. So, resulting from the activities of individuals So we're talking about normal people, individuals, not industries, not factories, for example. And 4 countries, the United Kingdom, Sweden, Italy and Portugal, over this time period. Overall, it's clear that the UK... excuse me. I'm still recovering from a little cold or flu-like virus. It's clear that the United Kingdom's release, well, the country's not releasing it, it's people releasing it. We do say the UK, though. There's a little grammatical rule that anything that's a group, like the United Kingdom, is different. What do you call them? Nation states, I guess. England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. We use like the Philippines, group of islands, the USA, group of states. So the United Kingdom. But I'm going to change this, actually. I'm going to change it to something which would be more common if you were reading a real academic report written by a native speaker. It's clear that per capita emissions of carbon dioxide. I apologize for my messy writing. Per capita emissions of carbon dioxide well, it would be R falling slightly, but we can't say R because it's not now. The data is all finished over 15 years ago for the last year shown. So simply fell slightly. Past simple for finish time. This is a finish time period, fell slightly. Over the 40-year periods, yeah, I mean, gradually, steadily, slightly, I don't know. I mean, if it's going from 11 to 9, it's still very good for the environment. I might change that word, just say fell steadily. Steadily, just steady, tick, not like erratic or anything like that. And here we get to a pretty basic language issue. You can't say number for carbon dioxide. You don't say 1 carbon dioxide, 2 carbon dioxide. It's uncountable, of course, like all gases would be. You can say the number of metric tons, though, because interestingly, the units are always countable. The amounts of carbon dioxide, not really in the air. It's, not in general. It's not from factories. We're talking about just from individuals, basically. And again, it's finish time. Surged in Portugal and Italy. And that's not bad now. So let's have a quick look. The given line chart illustrates the average annual quantities of CO2 emissions per person in the UK, Sweden, Italy, and Portugal for those 40 years. Overall, it's clear that per capita emissions of CO2 in the UK fell steadily over the 40-year period. Meanwhile, the amounts of carbon dioxide surged in Italy and Portugal. Okay, that's fine now. Looking at the graph more closely, one can see that the United Kingdom had the highest proportion. I don't see any proportion, no percentages. You have to understand the differences. You can't just say words that are completely wrong. You have to say words which are correct. The highest quantity amount would be okay of carbon dioxide emissions in 1967. As I say, it's a kind of mass, I suppose, because it's tons. But quantity is fine. The highest quantity of carbon dioxide emissions in 1967. At this time, one person, released is spelt wrong, but it also seems a bit weird. It kind of sounds like it's just from the person's body, like breathing. It's more about their activities for their carbon footprint. So one person was responsible for the release of around 11 metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is 5 times what, higher or lower? 5 times higher than the people, the figure for the people, let's say the corresponding figure for people living in Portugal. Now, this might be a useful word, corresponding. It means we don't have to say all the same thing again. It just means the same one for, a different thing. On the other hand, the graph of Sweden, we don't talk about the graph is the whole thing, actually. This is a line graph, and each one is a line, but we don't talk about the graph of the line. We talk about the particular data, the numbers or the percentages or whatever. So the figure for Sweden experienced a small percent of rise, a small rise. Oh, that's very messy. What have I done? It doesn't look very small to me. It looks quite significant, actually. I probably wouldn't use the word small. I'd say minor or something. A minor rise, but it's not really, is it? And you could say that this is quite minor, quite small, but it looks quite significant, really. Just in 10 years, it's increasing by more than... Is it... Not more than, but by about 25% from... Yeah, just from under 9 to maybe about 10.5. Well, it doesn't seem minor. It doesn't seem minor. It doesn't seem minor because it's a sharper rate of increase than I can see anywhere else. They're pretty similar, aren't they? But I can never see a sharper increase anywhere else. Is that a bit? No. Well, yeah, maybe this one. But It doesn't seem small to me. There's no reason to claim it's small, I think. I'm going to say sharp rise. Before dropping significantly. Sharp is about the speed, so the angle. If the angle is sharp like this, sharp. If it's like this, then not too sharp, because the speed of change is a bit slower. Before dropping significantly to around a half of the highest points. Okay, that's okay. In contrast, Italy and Portugal's figures, percentages really, increased gradually, and the peak was at in 2007. But 2007 is the last year, so it seems a bit weird to say peak. When you say peak, it's like this. You can see it's the highest point because you've got data before and after. If it's rising, maybe it will keep rising. You don't know. It doesn't look like it because it looks like it's leveling off, but we still don't know. We don't know what happens in 2017, for example. So I wouldn't say peak here. I would just say the figures end at the highest point for the period. So gradually, let's say the figures increase gradually to end at high points for the period. Of around 8 and 6 metric tons. Well, you can say tons like this or tons like this, depending on the country. You certainly can't say tones, which has a completely different meaning. Not for each, we want to say respectively. In 2007, if you say for each, it means they both have 8 and they both have 6. When you say respectively, it means the first figure is for the first country and the second figure is for the second country. So, different meaning. I don't know why this has started to spread, but it has. If that has spread to you, please fix that problem in your brain. Thank you for your cooperation. A small point, we usually, when we say respectively, we usually put the smallest one first. It's just how in English we kind of use numbers in a way that brains can process it easily. So it seems a bit odd when you put the highest one first. So I would quite simply just change these and also change the figures, put 6 first and 8. But it's a relatively small point compared to other points here, some of which are very major points really. Scoring, 4 overall, with 4 in most parts. I leant towards 5 for grammar, but it doesn't matter. The overall would be 4. Task achievement 4 because of, well, the keyword why I chose 4, if I had to choose one from here, would be inaccuracies. We're talking about parts, so parts is very general, but even though there are many things I could talk about, like the grammatical issues being inaccuracies, the basic issues with the word choice, as well as simple spelling mistakes and simple grammar mistakes, it creates the overall feeling of I suppose I should say limited grasp of the English language. If you're thinking about how to deal with a task 1 essay, and if you're going to teach how to address them, which is something I've done a lot in the past, teaching about the difference between number and amount and percentage and proportion and rate and quantity, this is this is a very basic thing, but especially the difference between number and amount. When you're teaching about countable nouns having number and uncountable nouns having amount, it just seems like this student learns that number, amount, and is there anything else? Percent are words that you might use in Task 1 essays, but didn't really learn the difference between them. So that's obviously going to have a huge effect on the overall bigger picture, the overall understanding for the reader. There are no percentages here. There are no numbers here in the data. That's a kind of key thing to understand. It's a kind of elementary thing to understand. So that's why I chose 4 for that. Why I chose number 4 for coherence and cohesion. No clear progression. They were the key words for me. And what I mean by that is it's one of these answers I get a lot. I get too often, which in my head I just call figure goes up, figure goes down. Figure goes up, figure goes down. So if you don't understand how to talk about something flexibly using English, you might just learn a few things like, I don't know, a noun like number or proportion, which is another incorrect word to use. And then you'll just learn a few basic things from your IELTS teacher or YouTube videos, whatever you're using. And you'll just focus on those, like rise, drop, increase gradually. But what you're kind of missing is being able to discuss it in an interesting way, where for the reader, you're kind of getting the real importance of it, the real meaning. So obviously the key things, because we're talking about the environment, a key thing is whether countries are seeing a rise in the emissions or a reduction. We want them to go down, of course, because the CO2, but we don't give our opinions. But yeah, obviously the key things, the UK steadily declines, the figure for the UK. In Sweden, for the first decade, there's a sharp rise, and then it declines sharply at first, and then a bit more gradually. For the other two, increasing the whole time, well, most of the time, I should say, but the whole time for Portugal. But sharply at first, the first decade, then more gradually, and then leveling out over the final decade. And a key thing you can see is that at one point the figure for Italy actually overtakes that of Sweden because they have opposing trends. So that would be something I would talk about. But when you talk about it, you want to talk about the thing it's referring to, which is per capita emissions. And that's what it's about. So you don't want to just keep saying, number goes up, figure goes down, percentage is the highest, percentage is the smallest, next percentage is the biggest. You want to talk about what it's actually talking about, which is average per capita emissions, and people just they lose sight of that. It becomes, this is the biggest number, this is the second biggest number. If it shows number, which this one doesn't, this is quantity. But I'm just explaining to give you an example. Or it's kind of figure goes up, figure goes down, figure goes up again. It's very mechanical, it's very boring. And it is the reason why I would say there's no clear progression. If I, take a look again here. If you look at the time periods given, excuse me, this is another big reason. So we're talking about the first year, 1967, and we're saying it's the highest for the UK, which is true. And then we're moving on to talk about the corresponding figure for, well, there's a comparison made between that and Portugal in the highest year. I don't know why that comparison is made. It's just, as well as figure goes up, figure goes down, we've got biggest figure, lowest figure. It's just deciding to compare the biggest and the smallest. What we want to talk about is the changes over the period a bit more for this one, because we've got continuous data for the whole time. We've got data for 1967, 1968, and 1969. So we really want to talk about the changes for this one. When we're talking about comparisons where relevant, we don't mean just choosing the biggest and smallest. We mean talking about which ones are seeing a rise and which ones are seeing a fall, for example. That's a good way to make comparisons for this one. But going back to this, it's a 40-year period, as the writer keeps saying. But we're not talking about the whole 40 years. If you actually take a look again, we've got 1967. This is the biggest, this is the lowest. On the other hand, the figure for Sweden rose for the first decade before dropping significantly. Italy and Portugal increased gradually. So not everything is really discussed. I mean, we don't really talk about the UK after 1967, for example. We talk about Portugal a bit in 1967 and after 1967, but it seems a bit random. So the UK and Portugal compared for one specific year. Then Sweden talked about for the first decade, and after the first decade, then it's not the UK and Portugal being compared anymore. Now, for some reason, it's Italy and Portugal over the whole period. So talking about the general change is a little bit better, increased gradually, but I would focus more on how it's faster at first, then it slows down, then it levels out. And you can do that in a very short way. You can do that in possibly just one sentence if you've got enough of English. Sorry, I'm waffling a bit. I'm talking a lot, and I know I am, but I'm just trying to really make you understand that you have to kind of talk about the general changes for the whole period for each country, and it's not really happening here. So there's no clear progression in that sense, I think. The way to do it is, it talks about how the figures for these two increase gradually. I think gradually might not be the right word, but kind of pretty much continuously for the whole period, and sometimes more gradually than at other times. But you kind of start with that. You say, okay, these two went up, and then you give a bit more specific detail about the speed over different periods. And you say these two went down, and then you talk about these two together. But it's not really done that. It does seem a bit kind of random with no clear progression. Lexical resource, I would say limited control of word formation and spelling. Spelling is not usually a big issue, but it's quite shocking here sometimes, actually, like release we talked about. Or very basic things like line with two L's. That's just careless, lazy and careless not to find that and change it. And they definitely do cause strain for the reader, I would say. They don't make it easy for me to understand. And basic vocabulary, trying not to use them repetitively, but using words inappropriately. Number, for example, or proportion is completely inappropriate here. Percent is completely inappropriate here. And finally, for the grammar, limited range of structures, only rare use of subordinate clauses. Grammar is actually the best thing. I gave this 5, in fact, didn't I? My apologies, I gave this 5. There are attempts to use complex sentences, which is required. This is quite nice. So, experienced a sharp rise before dropping significantly. I mean, it's not exactly right, because usually we say verb, adverb, verb, adverb, but here it's adjective, noun, verb, adverb. So it should be a sharp rise followed by a significant fall, for example, or we use verb, adverb, verb, adverb. So we say rose sharply before dropping significantly, but it's still good for this essay. It's relatively good for this essay. And anything else that's okay? Yeah, which is 5 times, using relative pronouns like which to make longer complex sentences. It's not perfect, of course. 5 times higher it should be. And it's then the quantity for the figure for people living in Portugal. But still, you know, it's okay. And the grammar is probably the best thing about this, because a lot of the really bad errors are with word choice, for example, like the use of number. It's still not great. I wouldn't say it's a high 5, but it is a 5. It's got many. It's not many, but it's got several grammatical errors that can cause some difficulty for the reader, but at least it attempts complex sentences, even if they have inaccuracies in them. I apologize again for waffling, which I have a bit. I do think I'm a better writer than a speaker, but I'll keep practicing on my speaking too, for your sake. But I hope you have found the video useful. As always, thank you for watching and listening. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to make them under the video. Have a nice day.